Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
Welcome to Aerospace Industry Outlook Fall 2025. Presented by Richard Aboulafia and brought to you by Aerospace Manufacturing and Design Magazine and GIE Media's Manufacturing Group publications. I'm Eric Brothers, editor for the magazines and the webinar moderator. Aviation industry expert Richard Aboulafia will examine current aerospace markets and what to expect as aerospace firms get ready to report their third quarter results. Of particular focus, what are aerospace original equipment manufacturers' production rate plans now? How will the economy affect forecasts for the rest of this year and into next year? And what impacts are tariffs having on the OEMs and their supply chain? Our presenter, Richard Aboulafia, Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, is Managing Director, Aerodynamic Advisory of Ann Arbor, Michigan. As many of you know, Mr. Aboulafia is widely respected as an aviation industry expert and contributor to Aerospace Manufacturing and Design's annual forecast issue. Since 1988, Richard has tracked aircraft programs, markets, and companies as an analyst and consultant. He manages consulting projects in the commercial and military aviation field and analyzes broader defense and aerospace market and industry trends. Prior to joining Aerodynamic in January 2022, he was vice president of analysis at Teal Group. There, in addition to his consulting role, he wrote and edited Teal Group's World Military and Civil Aircraft Briefing, a forecasting and analysis tool covering more than 135 aircraft programs and markets. He's advised numerous aerospace companies, including most prime and many second and third tier contractors in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. He also advises numerous financial institutions on aerospace market conditions. Frequently cited as an aviation industry authority by trade and news publications, Richard has appeared on numerous television news and radio programs, including those on ABC, the BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, CBS, CNN, NBC, NPR, and PBS. Before we begin, we'd like to thank Kennametal. Kennametal has been cutting metal since 1938. It's a story of continuous innovation, starting with the development of revolutionary tungsten titanium carbide alloy cutting tools specifically for working with steel. This not only led to a new class of machining tools that cut faster, lasted longer, and drove productivity in everything from the automobile to the airplane, but also to Kennametal's recognition as an industry leader across continents and industries, including transportation, construction, aerospace and defense, medical, general engineering, and more. As they say at Kennametal, we don't cut corners, we cut metal. Your toughest materials don't stand a chance. Learn more at www.kennametal.com. We'd also like to thank Fagor Automation has vast experience in the development and manufacturing of products for machine automation and control. They offer solutions tailored to the needs of customers, from developing software to the versatility of their production process. Historically, Fagor Automation is focused on the machine tool sector, where they are one of the world leaders with a broad technical and sales network spread out in more than 50 countries through branch offices and distributors. Niigata Engineering, founded in 1895, is the oldest existing horizontal-focused machine tool builder in Japan. Known for their significant performance advancements, Niigata's high-rigidity boxway 5-axis trunnion series solutions for complex aerospace and defense applications are equipped with a one-piece casting trunnion table. Both ends of the table are supported by robust roller bearings and warm-wheel drives. This mechanical structure emphasizes stable machining accuracy throughout the work envelope. High horsepower and torque allow you to take full advantage of the rigid machine frame. For hard metals, high torque, heavy-duty spindles are available with up to 1,438 foot-pounds of torque. SMW Autoblock is a work-holding company focused on achieving customers' goals and expectations with the highest quality products and services. SMW Autoblock combines stock, standard products with a highly trained sales, service, and engineering team to consistently provide the ideal work-holding solutions to customers across a wide variety of industries. The organization strives to achieve a deeper understanding of customers' needs to provide products and services geared towards specific customer applications, maintaining long-term, mutually beneficial partnerships to enhance machine tools and drive modern manufacturing. Solar Atmospheres provides commercial vacuum heat treating and brazing services in markets including aerospace and defense, with more than 90 vacuum furnaces from lab size to 48 feet long with 150,000-pound capacity. Solar atmospheres can handle any size job. It operates plants in eastern and western Pennsylvania, California, Michigan, and South Carolina, all ISO 9001, 2015, AS 9100D, and NADCAP registered for heat treating. Where is commercial aerospace now and where is it headed? Sales remain brisk, but the supply chain still lags in key areas. Nevertheless, Airbus is charging ahead to meet its goal of 800 jetliners delivered this year. Boeing has stabilized its 737 MAX production and is potentially seeking to increase its build rate. Embraer has a record transport jet backlog and a lead in regional jet manufacturing. We asked Richard to explain what members of the aerospace supply chain need to know to prepare for what's ahead. Are we experiencing turbulence or is this smooth air ahead? Richard?
Thank you very much, Eric. And thanks to you all for coming, and of course to our sponsors of this webinar. As Eric says, I'm going to walk you through all the latest trends and conditions in this industry, and it continues to be a story of very strong demand, but chaos. Well, a little less chaos, but still a relatively chaotic situation on the supply side. The chaos has shifted a bit. When we last spoke, and certainly last year, the chaos was more on the industry side, supply chain, what have you. Now it's more maybe on the government side. So that's become a real complicating factor. All this and more coming up. Next page, please. Thank you. First of all, there's so much to discuss. So I'm just going to walk through at first all the really big issues that we're wrestling with. Strong market outlook is in the center of things. People want aircraft, both civil and military. That is if there's a silver lining, that's it. Everything else around it complicates both the supply side arrangement and, of course, the composition of what's being built out there in our glorious industry. Starting at the top and moving clockwise, the economy is good enough, right? I mean, how to put this gently, everything that people are trying to do seems to be basically designed to create a recession, and it hasn't happened. Now, there's a school of thought that says that hasn't happened in part because of an extremely robust stock market bubble revolving around artificial intelligence and God knows what else. But in the here and now, there's a slowdown, but I don't see a recession. More on the impact to the air travel system in a moment. To the right, the probable rise of Europe, that's impacting, more on defense spending in Europe, but they are moving very aggressively towards bolstering their defense sector and defense spending, and that is changing the composition of the industry. To the right, it's all change in the U.S. defense system. Couple of things. There's a huge shift of resources to home alone systems. In other words, we don't really want to defend the outside world. We don't want to, defend anyone in Asia or Europe, really. We want home alone systems. What does that mean? It means billions, possibly trillions into the Golden Dome system for missile defense. It means submarines. It means systems based in the U.S., such as the F-47 or the B-21, and certainly the GBSD nuclear missile replacement program, ICBM replacement program. We're moving away from anything related to defending with allies, working with allies, and moving towards home alone systems. However, it's sort of fascinating. If we'd had a conversation about a month ago, I would have said expeditionary systems are being clobbered. That's no longer true. The administration has kind of massively reversed itself, in particular with two programs. One is the FAXX, basically the new carrier aviation combat aircraft. And they went from trying to kill it to saying there could be an announcement for a contract award this week, and there could be, or next week. It might happen anytime. Similarly, they tried killing the AWACS replacement program using the E-7 from Boeing. That's a $3 or $4 billion program or more. And all of a sudden, they seem to have reversed themselves. So we don't know what's happening with expeditionary systems. Again, a couple of weeks ago, they would have been dead. Now it's, okay, here's the many billions of dollars you wanted. We like them too, or at least we're willing to surrender to Congress on that. Another big change is that not surprisingly, given all the chaos we've seen in supply chains and doubts about people's ability to get the defense equipment they want, everyone wants their own aerospace industry. Demands for sovereignty, their own capabilities, have grown. And that, of course, greatly complicates the production side of things out there in the world. The good old days of building everything in the US and Europe and everyone else would just take from us. Now everybody, even Australia, wants their own industry, and that is complicating things. So inevitably, supply constraints. That's, of course, an adjunct to that and closely connected, but they continue to bedevil us. My colleague Mike Stengel at Aerodynamic used to liken it, still does liken it, to a game of whack-a-mole. One day it's nickel castings and forgings, one day it's interiors and labs, one day it's coatings, another day it's semiconductors, then it's titanium. It's it's continuing. And then finally, the best friend for this industry over the past half century has been free trade. It has absolutely been the lifeblood of the industry. In particular, the WTO's ATCA treaty, Agreement on Trade in Civil Aircraft. It's my favorite treaty. Google it. It basically guaranteed that jetliners could cross borders. Independence Day happened. The Trump administration decided that we should have tariff rates that go back to the 1920s or 30s, whenever the Smoot-Hawley Act was back, and tariffs are way up. However, positive side, there have been a series of carve-outs for civil aviation. So ATCA is dead. Long live ATCA. I don't know why we killed it, because we have this enormous trade surplus in aerospace, $100 billion trade surplus. So killing it is beyond dumb, but at least parts of it are coming back. There are holes and pieces and bits, like Brazil isn't 100%. And you've got, well, Switzerland of all places, because they're not part of the EU, so they weren't gotten into the EU carve out for civil aviation. So you've got all of these huge complications that, make the end of ATCA, well, even though there are carve outs, there are still issues with that. Next page, please. Now, I won't read through all of this, but a lot of our clients have been asking, okay, government shutdown, what does it mean? We did this 10 days ago. I haven't changed it. We haven't changed it. A couple things you should be mindful of. One, I mean, there's really just two things from our sector. You can walk through this at your leisure, but first of all, certification of Boeing jets, 737 MAX, is still um, kind of on a manual process basis with the FAA. And there's no way you can shut down government without having a serious impact. And it's going to be really hard to catch up with that because FAA bandwidth was limited as it is. Similarly, 777X certification was delayed yet again a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, in part because of this reality. The people aren't there. They're not doing their jobs. They're not being paid. They were sent home. Far more worrying is the air traffic control system, because this was a workforce that was very badly demoralized by DOGE. DOGE, of course, consisted of a bunch of teenagers given chainsaws and told to, well, reduce government. There are some places like aerospace where government is super useful. Air traffic control, for example. It's a real problem. And not only that, but the training schools have been shut down, which means the people, the class of trainees inducted into the air traffic control system, that's not happening. And given the limited bandwidth associated with air traffic control training, that means there's going to be a gap in the system months from now. However long it takes to graduate from ATC school, that's going to show up later. So you've got the problem now with the shutdown, people not being paid, badly demoralized workforce, and some reason people at DOGE say, wait, they're leaving. I don't get it. Yeah, they're leaving because they don't like working there for some reason. And then not only that, you're going to have that gift that keeps on giving 6, 9, 10 months later when those people aren't graduating and you just can't catch up. So I'm really worried. And thank you, air traffic controllers, for your dedication, your professionalism, for sticking in despite miserable working conditions. I hope we treat you better in the future. Next page, please. So the macro dashboard of where we are in the jetliner business. And basically, we last did this June 30th. We're going to be updating it in a couple weeks, but I don't think things have changed a whole lot. Gray is start of the year. Black is middle point. Macroeconomics are generally stabilizing. I think we were more concerned about a recession earlier in the year, especially after Independence Day and all that other stuff. Things are stabilizing a little. Air travel demand, boy, is that holding up. I'm really thrilled about that. It's actually improving. It's not quite in dark green, but it's heavily into light green. That's good. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. Well, if you're a low-cost carrier, there is a definite shift towards premium front of cabin. It's basically corresponding to the sort of K-shaped economics where people at the top are doing great and people who are more price sensitive aren't doing great. So as a consequence, well, this explains why Spirit Airlines, of course, just went into bankruptcy again, and why, in general, all the low-cost carriers face a great deal of pressure, Southwest Airlines, whoever else. But if you're a legacy carrier that has plenty of exposure to premium traffic, you're fine. Things are really good, in fact. Delta just released their quarter announcements a couple weeks ago, and yeah, things look really good. Again, aside from sensitivity in the back of the cabin. Demand, aircraft demand, people buying jets. Oh, hell yeah. Please, can we have our jets now? It's just that simple. Um, so thoroughly dark green. Book-to-bill ratios are excellent. And then finally, more on this in a moment, aircraft supply. First quarter of the year, not good. Second quarter of the year, a little bit better. Like I said, it's under review. We might move this slightly to the right because of the FAA situation and what's going on. And you'll see in a moment that Airbus is not without its challenges also, despite the fact that they don't have to have their 320s hand certified by regulators the way that Boeing does with the 737 MAX. So continues to be the biggest area of concern in the industry, the supply side of things. Next page, please. Airlines doing pretty good, really. Like I said, driven by the front of cabin folks and international. If you look at net profit, it's going to be a pretty good year. The headline news for airlines, of course, gets dominated by the catastrophes that take place during various exogenous shocks, but there's nothing like COVID. I mean, look at that, negative 138 billion. Wow. Now, basically, you've got pretty good numbers, and they're consistently pretty good. Airline operating profits, just fine, just generally strong numbers. Middle East in particular, look at that. They're doing really well. They're, very aggressive about growth, and they're doing fine with it. A little bit of softness in North America driven by the low-cost carriers. Europe doing fine. Anyway, in general, global profit margins are up. Next page, please. One of my favorite charts, I show this every now and again, trotted out for special occasions, but one of the key drivers behind jetliner demand is the gap between the cost of capital and the cost of fuel. And you want a good wide gap. You want a world where interest rates are really super low. It's there at the bottom line. And you want a world where fuel is kind of in the Goldilocks zone, basically $70. That would be great. Cheaper than 70, well, then you tend to keep your older jets for longer. More expensive, then you have a hard time getting people to fly or making money or whatever. We're continuing to see kind of Goldilocks numbers in the fuel world. Can't rule out a price crash, but not likely. Things look like they're 70-ish for some time in 25 and 26. We'll see. If you can predict the price of fuel, go buy yourself your own desert island. But cautiously, things look all right. Interest rates probably coming down. They've already come down a notch in 25, just a bit of a notch. Obviously, they're under political pressure. It's going to be complicated if there really is a compromise of the independence of the Federal Reserve because of pressure to cut rates and fire people. Then you could actually see long-term interest rates rise, kind of a moron premium, as they called it in Britain back when that happened. But hopefully things will stay as they are. It doesn't look like anyone's going to take any big chances, and it looks like interest rates will continue to come down, hopefully to the 4% range. That would be good and sustainable. Next page, please. Now, one thing to understand about the aerostructure side of the business, and I'm presenting this to you because in a couple of weeks, most likely Spirit AeroSystems, which is the biggest single aerostructures company on the planet, they build the entire body of the 737. And of course, many of your fine machine tools go to companies like Spirit, GKN, Mitsubishi Heavy, Kawasaki, Subaru, Leonardo. There are many great aerostructures companies out there, but all of them have been subject to this rather difficult reality. Back in the 2010 range, you had Boeing and to a lesser extent Airbus saying, it's very simple, we want your profit margins. Partnering for success and all this other stuff. And then 2010s, we're doing this massive production ramp up. Find your own cash for the working capital needed to do that. Okay. Then you had the Mac shutdown. So they were left holding a bunch of inventory and work in progress. Could they buy machine tools? No. Then COVID-19, survival mode. They loaded up on debt, fired everybody they could. And now you've got the production reawakening and they're desperate. So people ask, what is happening at Spirit? Why do they have to become part of Boeing again? And again, they've just gotten final approval from the European Union to go ahead and rejoin Boeing. That's welcome news. It's because of this. Basically, this is why we can't have nice aerostructures companies, to paraphrase one of my daughter's favorite Taylor Swift songs. They need to become a P&L. They need to become a cost center rather than a P&L, and that means being reabsorbed back into Boeing and other companies. Next page, please. Now, let's talk about inventories and what it means for production problems. If you look at the inventory of undelivered jets that have been built, obviously look at that red line. This was a Mac story for the past 5 years or so. Not surprising. But what's really interesting is in the past few months, for the first time, the 320 slightly surpassed the Macs. They're delivering almost all the built-up inventory of Maxes, good progress with others. But the 320, there are a lot of aircraft that have been built that are awaiting engines or something like that, some interior issues. So in other words, Airbus is starting to feel the production strain associated with wanting to get to 65 per month next year, 75 the year after that. I don't think they're getting there that time. Um, you know, they're going to get there eventually. Demand is extremely strong for their jets. That's good news. But again, on the production side, and again, here we are, engines, a major challenge. When we talk about engines, we're talking about, I don't know, titanium castings and forgings, nickel castings and forgings, all this other stuff that represents a major challenge. Next page, please. So what are we expecting moving forward? As you can see, there we are in 2025 on the left. The name of the game until probably middle next year is supply chain bottlenecks, Boeing's ramp up, and quality issues. Boeing is doing really good. I know you've probably got some questions about, Kelly Ortberg has been there for a year and 4 months, I think, 5 months. He's the right guy at the right time. He's doing the right things. It's happening slowly because, how to put this gently, they've had a rough century. A lot of really bad decision making, a lot of really awful, worst in class leadership. But now there's an aerospace guy at the helm, and he's really good. And I think he's making a lot of smart decisions. It's just going to take a really, really, really long time. And you're starting to see it in the numbers. We think they'll get to, as soon as the FAA situation is resolved and the government shutdown ends, they'll get to 42 in the coming months and eventually get to 57, maybe beyond. So sometime in the back half of this decade, you can see that in the middle square, you've got concerns about an engine production ceiling and any lingering supply chain constraints. What does this mean? It means that we might face a structural limit on the number of aircraft engines that can be built because of casting and forging constraints. There's a few really smart commentators. There's a fellow, Mesh Fagenbaum, who does a really interesting assessment of titanium castings and forgings capacity. And he thinks that there is this structural limit, about 120 or so, 110, 120 per month. So we're probably facing that. Anyway, eventually we'll get through it. The investments will be made. The market will correct. We hope, we hope, we hope. And in the 2030s, we'll be back to demand driven. By that time, we'll hopefully have more of an equilibrium between supply and demand. All of this means that we're in for a really, really long cycle. More on that as my concluding slide. Um, but it's a long cycle that is built on production constraints. Basically, people can't get what they want, couldn't get what they want. They're having to wait. And as a consequence, unless something terrible happens, like a war or another pandemic, who knows? I think we're in for a really, really, really long cycle. Um, Again, I'll conclude with that thought at the end. Next page, please. However, it is a bit of a K shape. This is a different K. This is, as I like to say, over the past 5 years, my job has been brought to you by the letter K. There's a lot of Ks out there. Narrow bodies are growing so much faster than wide bodies, and wide bodies, we don't have them reaching the last decade's peak until sometime in the future. Why? Well, basically because the latest generation of narrow bodies can do so much more in terms of capabilities. Matter of fact, I made it to well into my 50s without ever flying across the Atlantic in a single aisle jet. And over the past 3 years, I think most of my flights across the Atlantic have been in a single aisle jet. They can do that now. It used to be you'd have to stop in Iceland. I mean, well, the 757 could do it, nothing else could. So now you've got 321s and even 737 Maxes doing transatlantic. They're also doing more work intra-Asia, more Middle East, Europe, whatever else. So you get a nice step cost reduction in operating economics, operating costs when you go from a twin aisle jet, a wide body, to a single aisle. And, people are taking advantage of that. Fleet planning is increasingly revolving around single aisle jetliners. Now, from a machine tool standpoint, that means there's stuff in the world of wide bodies that's kind of idle, and there's production lines for narrow body jets, and of course, all the associated components and systems. That's a little, you know, they're desperate for more. A little overtaxed. So this too is complicating the production recovery, this shift away from what was a 50-50 market to more of a two-thirds, one-third story in favor of narrow bodies and all of the associated components and structures with those jets. Next page, please. Thanks. A lot of people like to talk about engines these days, so responding to that, it's kind of an interesting story. Engines have the highest barriers to entry. Um, well, not everyone. People try to get into the engine market now and again. Right now, there are 4 people, which is, I think, a record, trying to get into the engine market. But if you go back to the dawn of the jet age, there have always been 3.5 players, Pratt& Whitney, General Electric, and Rolls-Royce, and the one half is Safran of France, which is partnered with General Electric on the CFM. And if you look at the population and order book for engines on the narrow body front, look at that. Basically, and this is installed base, so it distorts things for the future. But you've got LEAP and CFM, all from GE and Safran, basically something like 70%. Um, and then GTF, geared turbofan, that's, obviously it's skewed against this because there's not many in the population, but there's a fair number in the order book, and that's 8%. The old V2500 also led by Pratt& Whitney, 14%. Undecided, 7%. So, GE is an exceedingly well-run and successful company, and it shows up in the numbers, right? Then on the wide body front, you've got again it's not the same level of dominance by GE, but they're a little over half the market too. And Rolls-Royce is about 40%, the remainder being Pratt with the PW4000. So, wow, GE, the industrial powerhouse. One of the biggest questions we face when we look at the next generation of jetliners and when they're developed is when these guys will decide to do a new engine, which of course is what makes a new jetliner of any type possible. Um, it's hard. It's hard. If you're GE, it's hard to disrupt your own business, right? You dominate things to the tune of 60% plus. You're not going to, I mean, to their credit, they're doing the unducted fan rise, it's called, and that's the prop fan you've seen out there. It's very promising, but that's really a back half of the 2030 story. Um, and if you're Rolls-Royce, you've just come through one of the worst financial crises ever. You're recovering. If you're Pratt, good company, but most likely the part of your company, it's RTX. You're focused on the Raytheon element building missiles because everyone wants missiles. So maybe your devotion to the commercial aero engines isn't quite as focused as it used to be. All this to say that when we talk about a new jetliner, um, it's hard to see where the new engine for that new jetliner is going to come from anytime soon, aside from Rise. Now, there was an interesting Wall Street Journal story about a week or two ago that said that Boeing was talking to Rolls-Royce. That was denied. But if true, that would represent a very interesting development on the road towards creating a new jetliner. But it's safe to say right now that it doesn't look like any new product launches are coming anytime soon, which from a production standpoint, from a machine tool standpoint, it's not bad, right? I mean, steady state, people want to build stuff and they need to make the necessary investments to build what is in the pipeline. Next page, please. Complication, defense spending. It's if you remove such friendly places as Russia, North Korea, and Iran and China, you still get $2 trillion in defense spending last year. And that was a nice ramp up. These are in constant dollars. And, very strong. It's going to keep going. It would grow faster if they could build stuff, right? And this, of course, is purely driven by threat and perception of threat, not economics, not like the jetliner business. It's purely to what extent people focus on a very dangerous geopolitical landscape, which, of course, is unfortunately reality. So all of this is taking productive resources away. Your mix of who you sell your machine tools to definitely going to get more militarized, that's for sure. Next page, please. And Europe in particular, you've got this combination of the Ukraine war, Russia's war in Ukraine. Then you've got uncertainty about U.S. commitments. That's obviously focusing the mind, and then a broader geopolitical environment that's very unstable. So back, I believe, in June, you had a European commitment to get to 3.5% of GDP on defense spending. It's right now at about 2 continent-wide, two and change, plus another 1.5% going to defense adjacent issues, infrastructure, cybersecurity, things like that. You've also got a massive push for European defense autonomy. Again, concerns about the US's reliability as an ally. You've got coordinated defense initiatives, more joint programs, and what they say is a war economy mindset. Basically, Europe needs to invest more in people and industry and infrastructure associated with the defense industry. They haven't had that in decades. Matter of fact, for many years, European investors were kind of skittish about putting money into defense companies. And now it's like, oh, yeah, what a great opportunity. So you look at all the companies below, wow, growing at a pretty breakneck clip. Next page, please. And sure enough, it's really interesting. Look, the Trump administration's defense budget is pretty good. It's $1 trillion or 900 and change or something along those lines. It's very complicated, of course, by the usual spending bills and whatever. But that bottom line indexed to the start of the year is what U.S. aerospace and defense share prices are doing. So they've grown nicely. But look at the top line. That's what Europe is doing. In other words, look, I mean, these are like NVIDIA numbers. You've got stock prices of European defense companies rising by, good Lord, 75% or something since the start of the year. I mean, this is a mega trend, right? And that means from the standpoint of their ability to invest in things like machine tools, they're not wanting for capital. Matter of fact, they're having capital thrown at them. It's also interesting if you look at Korea as kind of a proxy for those emerging defense producers I mentioned with the first slide. Wow, look at that. They are absolutely on a tear also. So the US has become what we call a mature defense market, and the really positive growth markets out there in defense world are Korea and and Europe. So a very big change. You might find a shift in the business you do towards international customers, or if you're a machine tool company that's domiciled in a foreign place, some either way, a different country. Not that the U.S. won't be strong, but there's a big difference between, say, 30% capital markets growth and or equities markets growth and 75%. That signals a different demand pattern, I think. Next page, please. A little chart about next generation aircraft. Congratulations to Boeing for winning NGAD, or at least the first phase of NGAD, increment one, probably about 150, 200 jets. That's the F-47 program to be built probably in St. Louis. And then sort of a mix of people coming down. What people want to talk about these days is FAXX, because as I mentioned in the upfront chart, going from expeditionary systems, no, to expeditionary systems, okay, from the administration, you've got a reversal on FAXX. Like I said, a contract will be awarded this week. It comes down to Northrop Grumman and Boeing. And the market seems to think slight favor for Northrop Grumman. That's the sentiment we pick up from people talking, just talking in the industry. My personal belief is it's really a toss-up. Either could win. And that's going to be a substantial program. And of course, like NGAD, like F-47, that requires a substantial amount of production investment. Now, collaborative combat aircraft, you've probably been following that in the headlines. That, of course, is the drones that work with next generation fighters. CCA Increment 1 was won by Anduril and General Atomics. CCA Increment 2, that's wide open. You're going to see a lot of different CCAs. It's going to be a while before you've got the kind of production numbers you associate with the full-up program, probably the 2030s. But nevertheless, there's some interesting manufacturing opportunities. Then finally, on the right, CX, Next Generation Jetliner Transport, could easily be a reborn C-17, and probably in the 2030s. And it's kind of interesting. We tried to track down the machine tools associated with the C-17. It looks like they were auctioned off. So bizarrely, you could see a reborn C-17 and huge demand for machine tools for an old jet. That's kind of a weird moment, right? Anyway, next slide, please. So, going to conclude with this slide, my big happy supercycle thesis, I suppose. If you compare this cycle, 2021 to 2029, that's the red line there, indexed to year one, with all the other cycles I've had the pleasure of witnessing in history. My career began in 1988, so that cycle on the right is, I remember that one very well, very well. After, at that stage of my career, still worried about employment and stuff. But it's really interesting. Cycles kind of contain the seeds of their own destruction. It's like any other cyclical market. People who produce stuff keep producing it until they get a demand signal saying, enough, we've had enough cars, we've got enough, and, hey, we've got lots filled with cars, or airlines have too much capacity, stop. And then there's a downturn. So sometimes, like the 95 2004 cycle, they got to year 7 before, oops. And of course, that was actually triggered by the 2000 tech crash. Then, of course, 9/11. 2004, 2013. That was a good market. That was actually stopped sometime around year 6. 89, it made it, wow, year 4 before we had a bit of a massive correction. What is happening here? Well, we're now in year 5 of that red line, right? 2025. Last year, 2024, actually saw a dip. Why? Purely due to the production side, purely due to that combination of supply chain constraints, coupled with the Boeing strike, 53 days of not delivering jet. That'll take a chunk out of output. And on top of that, fun story, Fort Worth was turned into the eighth largest air force in the world because you had several hundred parked F-35s that weren't counted as deliveries because they were waiting for software associated with the Block 4 upgrade package. So all this meant that last year, even though it was an upcycle from a demand standpoint, from an output standpoint, we actually took a bit of a hit. So what does all of this mean? It means that we're not outbuilding, we're not overbuilding, we're not at any risk at all of overcapacity. We're just going to keep going. And then I think we'll hit a nice plateau because again, supply and demand will only reach equilibrium towards, well, sometime in the early years of the next decade. So is it a super cycle or is it a cycle that couldn't quite live up to the expectations and potential of producers and customers in the early years and ultimately will catch up? But because of this massive chunk of undelivered capacity, we've got some really good times ahead. So that's the optimum. If I were a customer in the supply chain or at the prime level, and I was seeking to invest in machine tools, I would say, hey, for the long haul, things look pretty good. Let's commit to that. And that's my earnest hope. I hope we've got great times ahead for everybody as long as we can get through these rather difficult constraints. And again, this series of weird tariffs and government shutdown problems and whatever else that's complicating an already difficult supply picture. Thanks so much for listening to me. And as Eric said, we've got time for questions here. So I'll turn it back to you, Eric.
Thank you so much, Richard, for giving us some better ideas on what to expect for aerospace markets right now and into the new year. A number of questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can, but we talked a little bit about production and goals, and Airbus just opened a new A320 final assembly line in Mobile. Are they going to be producing gliders or will they have engines for that? And again, Boeing is optimistic about increasing its production rate. Can you address those issues?
Yeah, of course. Great question. Airbus is differentiated from Boeing in that they've got multiple FACOs, final assembly and checkout facilities. So I think Airbus is up to, oh God, what is it? They've got one, obviously, they've got two big centers in Europe, Hamburg and Toulouse. They've got Montreal in Canada, Mobile, Alabama, Tianjin in China. Boeing, of course, has Puget Sound plus the 787 line in Charleston, South Carolina. Um, there are big advantages to having multiple FACOs, but it doesn't do anything with your supply chain because these are ultimately what you might call mercantilist creations. You're putting them together there, but every single component comes from somewhere else. And they come from exactly the same place the other FACOs are getting their, engines from, or castings and forgings and interiors and semiconductors and coatings and whatever else, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. So I welcome the Mobile line. I think politically it's very savvy of them, and it's also good to have access to workers. America is a good place to do manufacturing. It is, no question. But does it address the core problems associated with building jets in this age, the supply chain? The answer, sadly, is no, not really. It's not happening there. That's not the bottleneck. As for Boeing, again, I'm a really big believer in their new management, and that's the first time this century I've said that. I mean, it feels weird, but yeah, Ortberg's really good. But again, you've got the FAA issue and you've got supply chain issues, but the discussion about Boeing is so much more positive this year than it was last year. So much more positive. So I can tell you with utter confidence they'll get to 42 per month next year. I feel really good about that. And I feel very confident the year after that they'll get into the 50s. So it's a positive. And oh wow, also the 787, there's been a significant uptick. And on the wide body front, demand for the 78 is stronger than any other twin aisle program. So, Boeing has basically two ways to bring in money, increase the max and output and increase the 787. And right now, both are the best they've been in years and heading in the best direction they've been in years.
All right. We have several questions about maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So the MRO industry has kind of picked up the slack from the lack of new aero engines and keeping the older ones flying. How much longer do you think that will continue, and what do you see as trends in general for that MRO market?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there is this trade-off, right? And boy, retirements have not been anywhere near where they should be or predicted to be, and that's a function of jetliners staying around longer. In general, MRO, especially on the part side, maybe not the wrench turning side, but on the part side, is more profitable. So there are certainly companies who are very happy with the state of affairs. Okay, jetliners are staying around longer. That's more D checks, that's more engine overhauls, that's more money from a parts standpoint. There are plenty of people who are just thrilled about that. Um, it's going to keep going because again, you've got that supply gap where people wanted aircraft and they weren't built. And we're catching up again, and we're going to keep catching up. But you're not going to see any significant fall off in any more MRO demand this decade. I don't think there's much risk at all, really. It's kind of funny, every so often clients will ask us about used and serviceable material, the stuff that's harvested from retired jets. And guess what? No. Why? Because aircraft aren't being retired, right? So you have to build new parts, which are profitable, and that's good, right? So in general, it's a happy story, and I guess those are the mega trends. You compare the industries, the jet transport MRO industry with new build, both are healthily in excess of 100 billion a year. They're not that different in size, and there is that interesting trade-off. So anyway, that's a brief overview of MRO.
Thank you. So the U.S. has implemented new Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. Are those going to have an impact on, well, first of all, commercial aircraft production, and then if defense contracting also increases, is there going to be a expected price increase on that? And we'll throw in titanium as well on that.
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. I'll throw in a shameless plug for something that's free. But if you go to my website, richardaboulafia.com, April 2025 letter, it talks about tariffs. And for some reason, the biggest mystery, I mean, my dear God, they impose tariffs without a national security carve out. Who does that? It's like watching people try to shoot their feet. Um, you have to have a national security carve out, and we don't. Why? That means you're basically having the taxpayer pay for these tariffs for defense. That makes zero sense. So I hope that sense somehow comes into this. I don't know what they're thinking. Um, and that will inflate the price that the taxpayer pays for defense equipment. And it'll go to another part of the government, some sort of giant cash recirculation machine or self-licking ice cream cone or whatever you call it. I don't know what it is. It's weird. As for the civil side, it's complicated. There's some raw material comes from elsewhere, like Canada, of course. Some milled product comes from here, and some from elsewhere. Is it that big a part of the cost buildup? Probably not. I'm more worried about the other tariffs and what could happen there. Um, but for the most part, you're talking a few percent. I don't think it's a major challenge, but it. One issue is that people bulked up on stockpiles, and I'm not convinced we've had the full impact from this yet. So I'm a little concerned about that moving forward. Anyway, that's the extent of it.
Okay, thanks for that answer. A very complicated topic. So with the EU defense market and South Korea and Turkey and Sweden and the UK, are they still interested in getting US produced items? Or are
Yeah, that's a
they
huge
putting
question.
punitive tariffs on those?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully they're smarter than we are. They're not going to put a tariff on things that governments are buying, you know. Yes, they will have a national security carve out. The only concern is that well, U.S. reliability as an ally, and we've managed to piss off a bunch of people. So Canada's F-35 order, 88 aircraft, is now under review because for some reason Canada doesn't like their territorial sovereignty threatened. Go figure. I mean, I don't know how you know. I mean, I was just in Canada. I go to Canada every few months, and I, things aren't as bad as they were, but they were getting a little, these are not American products on shelves, that sort of thing. I mean, this is Canada for God's sake, one of my favorite jokes. How do you get 40 Canadians out of a swimming pool? You ask them politely. I mean, it's the most polite society on the planet. And somehow we piss them off to the point where our defense products are under review. The good news but getting back to the core of the question, which is a great question, is that people don't have a choice in the here and now. That European bandwidth, all of those countries you just mentioned, absolutely right, but it's not going to start producing stuff till what, 5, 6, 7 years from now? Till then, we're the only game in town for a lot of the bandwidth people need. A few exceptions, like, for example, Poland buying South Korean tanks and fighters. Norway also buying South Korean defense equipment. Turkey suddenly becoming very popular for defense equipment. Spain buying Korean fighters. But for the next few years, you want stuff, you got to talk to the US. I'm really more concerned about long-term erosion to the US's historically strong defense export market standing. In the here and now, people just got to keep buying stuff from us, but they'll be nursing a grudge and thinking about alternatives.
All right. While we're waiting for Boeing to come up with a replacement for the 757 or whatever middle market plane they're going to have, is the market ripe for new players like Jet Zero and Radia for some of their cargo and platforms and blended wing body aircraft?
This is one of my favorite issues. When Jet Zero broke cover after a few years of stealth operations, my co-managing director, Kevin Michaels, and I headed out west and hugely impressed with what they're doing. Hugely impressed. But they're a design house, right? And the real cost, as you all know, in the machine tool world, the real cost is setting up and industrializing for production. And that, of course, is with certification, everything like that. And for a jet in this class, it's 12 to 15 billion. So you've got a brilliant idea, really promising, just add $12 billion. Or work with someone. And their partnership with Northrop Grumman is utterly fascinating because Northrop is, of course, primarily interested in marketing the Jet Zero Z4, I believe, as a tanker. But if they decide, hey, let's get into commercial aircraft, that's like the biggest wild card I can think of in this industry. And that would be very welcome news because we need innovation, right? We do. There's also the very real chance that Boeing, under vastly better leadership, says, all right, we need to do something. And hey, by the way, we have blended wing body intellectual property. Maybe we'll do something different. Or maybe we'll just buy Jet Zero, heck. So there's all sorts of possibilities here. It's really intriguing. But right now, of course, it's just a game of scenarioizing for the future.
So you talked a little bit about the future of the NGAD and the FAXX. Can you tell us a little bit about the status of the F-35, where it stands in deliveries and production and software updates and all of that?
Absolutely. Most of the Block 4 TR3 upgrade program is done. There's still a few a few kinks in the system, but they're working it through. Production is at 156, where it should be. The guidance is that over the next 3 years, they'll be delivering about 180 a year to build down that backlog of jets that need to be modified to the Block 4 standard. In terms of demand, it's so built up, again, from people patiently waiting for their aircraft, that even with the Canadian review, even with the Swiss review, even with the German review, even with Portugal and Spain saying, screw you, we don't want your damn jets, basically, they're going to be able to maintain this rate. There's also been a significant cut in the US budget because, again, the administration's priorities are not expeditionary systems. So F-35 was cut in this budget. You can ignore all of this because people still have ordered a great number of F-35s. So through the end of the decade, the number is 156 manufacturing, probably into the early 2030s. After that, there is the risk of things dropping off, particularly as F-47, FAXX, and all the European programs begin to ramp up. But for the next 7 or 8 years, the answer is 156.
All right. That's a very precise number. Thank you. You mentioned a few times about what to expect for machine tools and aircraft markets. Question is, how about electronic suppliers? Are there any innovations and trends you see there?
Yeah, I mean, every so often something disruptive comes up. For me, the most interesting story of the past couple of decades is Garmin. Like I remember when they were these sort of handheld GPS guys, and now they dominate the low-end cockpit market. I mean, an incredibly innovative company. But the truth is that if you're talking about avionics from the standpoint of, human machine interface and all that other stuff, the existing players, particularly Rockwell Collins, just do a really good job. It's tough to do another Garmin, but what Garmin achieved and what will keep achieving, eventually they'll get into air transport, no doubt about that, is hugely impressive. At the lower end of the range, I can't help but wonder. I mean, there's so many of these tech companies that have interesting ideas for drones, drone interfaces, counter drone. Will there be some spillover from that into the broader A&D market? Quite possibly. I mean, there's so much investor capital going into these companies, and as a consequence, they're hiring talent, they're innovating, they're investing in the future. This is good. And actually, kudos to the Trump administration for encouraging this. This is in some ways, a welcome change. Now, some of them are going to fail. But on the other hand, there is innovation here. We just don't know where it's going to go.
All right. Both Boeing and Airbus predict a need for about 20,000 new airplanes over the next quarter century or so. Can the industry keep up with aero engines and, of course, the staff, the people that are needed to build the planes and the technology? Do you see a pipeline for that emerging?
Yeah, I wonder about that sometimes. I mean, the HR part of the industry has historically been really neglected, in part because we had a world where, well, unemployment was always over 4% or something. This is a different labor constrained world. And the aerospace and defense part of the industry is particularly strained in terms of people. Um, I'd like to see more strategic initiatives, more public-private partnerships, more partnerships with educational institutions. Every so often, I'm privileged to visit, a local technical college or community college or training center, and you'll see the local OEMs working with them. There needs to be an awful lot more of that. We need to secure that pipeline for the future. And also, frankly, we just need a new deal for labor. I mean, again, I love Kelly Ortberg, but the last part of Boeing that he seems to be getting to is labor relations. And so last year you had that strike. It was 53 days. It should have been 53 hours. Same results. Now you've got the strike in St. Louis. I, it'll be however many weeks. It should have been hours. The market price for labor is the market price for labor. I don't get it. And the mantra from Boeing HR right now is we'll just hire replacement workers because you get guys and ladies hanging around the 7-Eleven who are qualified to build F-15s. What universe is this? You need to think about this talent pipeline and what wages they need and what kind of partnership you can have with labor rather than this endless series of confrontations that labor and management had over the past 30 years. This is a different environment. Anyway, that's my soapbox. Apologies. And I hope people do move to secure that much bigger pipeline needed for talent moving forward.
One of the solutions suggested for that is automation of assembly lines and keeping your staff on point for the important things that only humans can do. And also now artificial intelligence is the answer to everything. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, AI has just got a lot of potential for, I don't know, predictive diagnostics and collaborative combat aircraft, whatever else. I just don't see it that much. And I mean, it can help in the margins in manufacturing. But in 1988, I entered this industry, immediately took to visiting factories because I loved it. My first factory was, I'll never forget, Garrett Aero Engines out in Phoenix, 1988. And it was one step away from sledgehammers, right? Just lots of people, lots of noise. I go to factories today. Hello, people, it's just some person operating a software console. In other words, from the standpoint of, I think we've done what we can. I really do. I'm sure there are places where automation can make a difference, but so much of that is already in. When I'm privileged to visit machine tool facilities, it just, wow, that thing is incredible. But right now, you're moving to the era of incremental improvements rather than the revolution we've seen over the course of my career.
Well, we're out of time, Richard. I want to thank you again for your presentation and responses. So thanks again to our Kennametal, Fager Automation, Nagata Engineering, SMW Autobot, and Solar Atmospheres. Be sure to register for our upcoming free webinars at the events menu tab of our websites. If you have any comments or suggestions, please email them to me at ebrothers@gie.net. On behalf of GIE Media's manufacturing group, I wish you a good day and goodbye for now.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.